Big day today. Just got 2 things in today. 2 QuietKats. I had the good fortune to have an extended testing period with both the QuietKat Apex and the QuietKat Ranger. These are both very capable and very fun electric bikes that were designed for hunting and general outdoor use. So what do you get for about 60% more in the price when you compare the Apex to the Ranger? You're about to find out. Let's start with what was the same between these 2 bikes. Now, the fundamentals are quite similar. They both have a very similar, if not identical frame. However, the frame on the Apex does accommodate a mid-drive motor, whereas it is a hub drive motor on the Ranger. Other than that, you have a similar geometry throughout, a very similar riding position. The handlebars and grips are the same, nice, wide, flat bar style, very easy to control. They also have similar accessories, and there are lots of them available. I had mine equipped with a saddlebag each, as well as some fenders mud guards to keep the mud off my butt. And I also had gun racks, although I had a different gun rack on either, and my favorite was the Culpin because it mounted independently. There were 2 different pieces, and since a handlebar on these bikes is not straight or square, it was nice to be able to mount it that way. Now the Gator was also a very nice rack. I think I would really like it on an ATV, not as much on the bike itself. Other things that were similar on the 2 bikes include the cable routing. Now this wasn't done beautifully. It's kind of a rat's nest in front, held together with some Velcro, so it's semi-organized chaos and it works. But I've seen some nicer integrations in entirely different e-bikes. The battery chargers are the same. They function the exact same. They are the same. Granted, the batteries are slightly different from bike to bike, so you do need to be aware of that. The saddle and the seat in general is the same. Stock seat is very comfortable, but they do have some nice aftermarket options as well, including one with some suspension from QuietKat that you could look into if you're into that. The other thing that was the same is kind of the controls, or at least the thumb throttle for the electric motor. And I did think this was a little bit underbuilt compared to the rest of the bike. Very plasticky, it felt like it could and likely will eventually break, but it did the job and I didn't have any problems myself. Now, one last similarity between these 2 e-bikes was that they both had a 1000 watt Bafang motor. Now, they are in different places. The Apex has mid-drive and the Ranger has a hub drive, but they were both 1000 watts. These are also available in 750 watt versions, which would make it a classified e-bike. Now, if I'm going to buy one of these, I will likely buy the 750 watt version for that very reason, because I would like to be able to ride it in as many places as possible. And a 1000 watt is not allowed everywhere. A lot of cities and towns are putting rules on that. And even the public lands can be a problem or a question around it anyway. Some agencies are still determining what the rules will be, like the U.S. Forest Service. I myself found out in my local ranger district that I was not able to ride the electric bike on mountain bike trails, but only on designated motorcycle trails. So do be aware of what your rules are in your area and consider the size of motor you get based on where you're going to ride. And know that, in general, you'll be able to ride a 750 watt in more areas by the rules. That doesn't mean that the 1000 watt motor doesn't bring some extra value. In fact, it does have a little bit more oomph. It will give you a bit more power, and if you're a bigger feller like me, you'll probably enjoy that in a lot of cases. So if you're on private land in a ranch in Texas, you go for it. Don't worry about that 750 watt or that classification. So what is different between the 2? Well, besides where the motor is placed, there is the difference in the suspension and many of the components. Starting with the suspension, the front fork suspension on the Apex is air suspension with 150 millimeters, 15 centimeters rather, or 6 inches of travel. That just means you could go over big trees or rocks or a curb quite smoothly and easily. The Ranger has a little bit less travel, 100 millimeters or 4 inches, and it is a coil spring shock. Both are adjustable, so you can have them stiffer or softer. I found them both to be entirely sufficient on-road and off-road. So Is there a great advantage to having that air shock? Well, I do think you get a little smoother ride out of the Apex than you do on the Ranger, and a little bit more, I'd say, sophisticated or advanced handling. But given that these are hardtail utility bikes, I'm probably not going to be doing any downhill with them, and I think that both of them are sufficient. The drivetrain is different, and this really comes down to components. So the trigger shifter on the Ranger is a SRAM X3, and the rear derailleur is a SRAM X4. These are actually kind of entry-level mountain bike grade components. The Ranger also has Tektro Aries series mechanical disc brakes, also a mountain bike device. They function just fine. The brakes get a little squeaky, but I found them to be entirely sufficient. However, when you move to the Apex, you do get an upgrade in components. You go from the plasticky feel of the shifters on the Ranger to a nice aluminum sort of mid-grade or upper-lower grade of the SRAM component family. You get the SRAM X5 shifter and rear derailleur. These are a nicer quality, and you did feel that a bit when you rode it, but they're still not high-end components. Given the price point it's at, I would expect it to be a little higher. And frankly, that is something that would be easy to upgrade even on the Ranger. So I'd be inclined to probably look at the Ranger and just buy those components aftermarket and make it a little nicer. The brakes, I should say, on the Apex are noticeably different and nice. They are Tektro as well, but they are a hydraulic brake system, disc brake system, and it's the E23 series, and these are designed for electric bikes. So they have more stopping power and more grip, and you do feel that, especially when you really need to lay on the brakes coming down a hill. And they can lock up if you want, but it was pretty easy to control and just come to a quick stop without locking them up, which I really appreciated on many occasions. The tires on both bikes are very nice. They're both from Kenda. As I had them, they were 26-inch by 4.5-inch wide tires on the Apex, whereas I had 24-inch by 4-inch wide tires on the Ranger. Both of them rode smoothly and wonderfully. I do think that the Ranger normally would come with a 26-inch tire now, so that's probably going to be 6s. They had adequate tread. I rode it in mud, sand, dirt, all the things, and I liked them very, very much. Very soft ride. Never had an issue with flats or anything like that. Great tires and wheels to have on either bike. One area where you do notice some difference is in the computers. So the computer on the Apex is a color screen. It has it's nice bright colors that are easy to see day or night. It does have a backlight for the daytime. And so you can see everything you need, including the wattage, output at the time, the speed, your trip meter, and your battery levels. You can also change the settings. You can set a time. You can do a number of different things on that computer that you cannot do on the Ranger. On the Ranger, it's a very simple black LCD screen. So it's fixed what you can see on the screen. You can't make any kind of customizations or changes, but I found it to be entirely adequate. It had a battery meter, it had my speed, an odometer, and it had the wattage output as I was riding along. So I really liked it. I thought they were both fine. The color screen is nice, but I'd say it's a nice to have, not a must have. In terms of assembly and maintenance, assembly was the same on both. They both arrived by FedEx in big old boxes. When you pulled them out, you did have to assemble or attach the front wheel as well as the handlebar, but there were excellent videos from QuietKat on how to do that, and I had no trouble at all doing so. The maintenance, I suspect that with the Apex there might be slightly more maintenance because of that mid-drive motor. Now mid-drives apparently have their advantages, but one of the disadvantages is that they put more tension on the chain because you're actually using that chain to drive the system, drive your rear wheel. Without that chain, you have a broken link and you can neither pedal nor use your electric motor. Now on the Ranger with a hub drive motor, if your chain broke for some reason and you still have battery life, you could still use your electric motor to get out of town. And same if your battery goes dead, you can still pedal. Now that is the case with the Apex as well. But because that Apex with the mid-drive motor pulls from the front, you do feel and hear tension on that chain at different times, especially if you're shifting. So I found you have to be much more careful about when you shift. When you first take off and engage the electric motor, you need to make sure you are in a low or middle gear. not an upper gear. Otherwise, you will feel it and hear that tension. And you risk misaligning the chain enough to where you could potentially break it. Now, that didn't happen to me. This is just a suspicion I have after riding it for a couple of months. I did love it and didn't have any issues, but I would expect that over the lifetime of a bike like that, you'll probably end up changing that chain a couple of times. Now, that doesn't mean the Ranger is hassle-free. In fact, if you do have to replace the motor on the Ranger, you're going to be replacing that whole rear wheel, and it's a little bit of an ordeal. However, hub drives motors do tend to be cheaper than the mid drives, so maybe it's a wash. When it came to the handling, and the stealth of the two bikes, I'd say they both rode very similarly and comfortably. A very similar upright position that was comfortable to ride all day long if you needed. They both steered very well and handled very well. I could go through ruts, mud puddles, over rocks, dirt, sand, up over curbs in town, everything without any issue on either bike. Now, I did feel a little bit better handling, I would say, on the Apex. It just had a little bit, I think that air suspension in the front combined with the bigger tires on the system I was riding and the hydraulic brakes did make a bit of a difference, and it was just a bit more, I'd say, advanced when you wanted to be more aggressive. That doesn't mean the Ranger wasn't sufficient. In fact, I think it was very practical and I never had any problems the way I rode it, both hard and soft. Now, when it comes to stealth, the Ranger is slightly quieter, and that I think is because of the hub motor versus the mid-drive motor. Now, the only time you really noticed it was actually when you were coasting. When you're cruising, whether you're pedaling and getting pedal assist or just using the throttle, 6s on sound. But when you are coasting, you actually hear a click, 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 click sound from the Apex that you don't hear on the Ranger. And so when I was out scouting or cruising along logging roads looking for turkeys, the Ranger would have been a little bit quieter than that Apex in certain points of time, but it really isn't a deal breaker at all, just something I noticed. This brings us to range and battery performance. This is one area that surprised me. Based on the specifications of the Apex, which QuietKat says gets 24 to 48 miles of range on a single battery charge, compared to that of the Ranger, where QuietKat says it gets 20 to 34 or something like that, 35 maybe it was more. But I did not experience anything within the advertised range of the Apex. The best I ever got was about 18 miles on a single charge. And more reliably, I'd shoot for about 15. Now, when I was out hunting, actually on a turkey hunt, riding on variable terrain, ups, downs, dirt, gravel, trails, and smooth roads, I mean, a little bit of everything, I got 16 miles of range over about a day and a half of use, and then it was done. And by the time I got back, I was down in the reserve level, so below 10% battery left. And at that point, the output of the electric motor is next to nothing and really doesn't help you, especially if you're climbing a hill. And at that point, when your battery is dead on these bikes, they are just really heavy bicycles. They weigh about 75 pounds dry, and so that's a lot to hoof up a hill. So I found that out the hard way. Now, I have seen reports online where some guys have seen 24 to 30 miles of range on the Apex, so maybe it was just the setup I had, or maybe it's just because I'm a bigger guy. I weigh about 220 and had about, on that turkey hunt, I had probably another 20, 30 pounds of gear on the bike. So that could be that. And it will vary. Battery life will vary with these bikes based on the weather, or how hot or cold it is, the conditions, and obviously how much load you're carrying. So consider that, but don't count on a full 48 miles of range on that Apex. I simply don't believe that. But on the Ranger, I did do better. Actually, I got about 20 miles of range on average. So in different terrain and flats in town, as well as hills in the mountains, I was able to get about 20 miles. So I would rely on that. Now that's on the very low end of the advertised range, but it did make it into the advertised range. So I was pleased with that. I think it's sufficient. Now, if you're ever going to go on any long trips, or certainly if you're going to go more than 10 or 15 miles one way, you probably ought to be getting an extra battery for these things and carrying it around. If I had that, I could have gone used that bike for the full 3 days of my turkey hunt in the woods because I didn't have anywhere to charge it. So keep that in mind. The battery range may not be as impressive as some let on. All right, so let's summarize this. Let's do a head-to-head. When it comes to battery performance, I'm giving that to the Ranger. My own experience was that it did better overall, and it did within the advertised range. Second, speed. They are the same. You know, I reached a top speed on both of about 25 miles an hour. On the Apex going down a hill at one point, I did hit 35, a little spooky, but still stable and didn't get too much of the speed wobbles, so I was actually impressed. But count on about 25 on the flats. That's if you have the 1,000 watt motor. 20 miles an hour is very doable on either, and I would suspect it's the same on a 750 watt. Takeoff and power. The Apex wins that one by a hair. So it does take off a little bit. When I did a drag race with my brother-in-law while we were out bow fishing, the Apex did take off the line a little bit quicker and gained about 20 yards on me on the Ranger before I was able to match the speed. And at that point, it really was even. So a slight edge, but probably not one I would base my purchase decision on. Ride and comfort. Ride and comfort, the same. These both feel the same riding them. They sit upright, they sit comfortably. It's a similar experience on either. That's a tie. Braking and control. I'm gonna give that one to the Apex. With those hydraulic brakes, you can stop more quickly and more control. And with those bigger tires and the air shocks, I think you just do get a little bit better handling when you're riding more aggressively. That doesn't mean the Ranger is subpar. In fact, it's better than most any other bike I've ridden, but the Apex is even better than the Ranger. Noise, I'm gonna give that one to the Ranger. So if you're out hunting, noise matters, and the Ranger just seemed a little bit quieter to me. Now, most of the noise you're gonna hear on either bike is probably gonna come from whatever surface you're riding on. If you're on gravel, like I was a lot of the time, that makes a lot of noise just from the tires hitting the gravel. But because you don't have a motor like you would on a dirt bike or an ATV, that's all you hear. So with either of these bikes, you're still gonna be a whole lot more stealthy than any off-highway vehicle, whether it's a motorcycle, a side-by-side, or an ATV. These e-bikes do not have a combustion engine, so hearing that tire hit the road is really all you hear, and it's a beautiful sound when it's not much of a sound at all. The last thing on look and feel. So when it comes to look and feel, I'm gonna give the Apex a slight edge. Now, I was also impressed because it had the same veil Kaza camouflage pattern that is found on my Numa hunting clothes, and so that was pretty cool. I matched more than I ever have in my life, but it just has a cool look and feel. Those bigger tires, the black rims, the aluminum components don't look quite as cheap and plasticky as some on the Ranger. It just has a great look to it, and it looks pretty meaty. And you get lots of comments and compliments. Lots of people ask me about it when I rode around town. I do like the look and feel of the Apex. The Ranger, though, looks very, very similar, let's admit it. So what do you really get in the Apex for 60% more money? Well, the main things you get are a smoother ride, I'd say a more aggressive ride, and you get some higher end components. You also get a technology upgrade in that computer, and you get just a cooler look and feel. And perhaps you do get to climb hills a little bit better than you would on the Ranger as well, thanks to that mid-drive motor. Now on the Ranger, you get still a hub drive motor that is plenty capable of going just about anywhere. And you can take all that money you saved from not buying the Apex and you can go buy a bunch of accessories. Buy yourself a trailer, a light, who knows what else, some saddlebags. You can fill that thing up and have it pretty tricked out for the same price as what you'd buy that Apex for. And that's probably what I'd do. So if you're a more pragmatic or practical type and you'd like to save a little bit of money, let's be honest, you're still not saving money by spending the money on this. And it's more than other options out there, but it's definitely cool and it's definitely worth it. I do think you get the most value out of the Ranger compared to the Apex, but for those of you that really like the nicest thing and the highest trim level of your trucks, you're probably gonna like the Apex as well. So check them both out. If you like this video, please show us by hitting on that thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel for more gear reviews like this. We cover everything from hunting, camping, and fishing, and hope to see you on the next one. Have a great one.